next up, we have Kira Noodleman from B Partners, who's going to moderate a panel on the solutions and technology that manufacturers can implement today. B Partners was an early investor in Rapid Robotics, and they invest in early stage companies that are in the hard tech and industrial technology spaces. So very happy to have Kira here and to lead this panel.
Thank you, Jordan. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you for the introduction. I wanted to start briefly and share B Partners, our worldviews that machines will win. And that can sound a little dystopian. And we also believe that history has shown us again and again that ultimately that's a positive outcome for humans. And so I want to share that we're proud investors of Rapid Robotics, their first round. And it's so exciting now, a few years later, to talk about broader industry adoption with emerging robotic solutions. So with that, very excited to introduce my brilliant panelists. We'll start with Aaron Prather of ASTM. He is the director of robotic and automated autonomous system programs. He was an end user deploying robotic solutions for 27 plus years, a lot of which was spent at FedEx, and now he's helping others to deploy their end solutions. And he's really gone from one company to the other to various companies across industries, and so he's really seen it all. And what's going to be fun to hear is his insight of what these common threads are. Next, we've got, we'll go to Ruddick here.
He studied mechanical engineering. Well, he's the CTO of Rapid, let's start there. And studied mechanical engineering at Stanford. And for over a decade, he's been focused on how software can transform robotic automation and capabilities. Previously ran the NPI software team for Da Vinci Surgical Robot at Intuitive Surgical, and also experienced firsthand the challenges of traditional ways of automating. And he also started Rapid with Jordan, and really with the vision of best-in-class robotics that could be available to the masses. And next up, we've got Greg Powers of Gray Solutions. And put simply here, Greg is VP of Cool Stuff. I've never heard a better title. And Gray Solutions, they're a leader in automation for customers, in particular for food and beverage. He's got over 30 years of experience in manufacturing with a focus on process innovation, plant automation, ERP systems, and he really has a vision of what is a smart factory and really wants to emphasize what is the art of the possible. So thank you all so much for being here. So we'll jump in with our first question, and we're going to start this conversation around present day. And so we've talked a lot in these past two panels about the state of the manufacturing industry. You know, the labor crisis, the role automation can play to ameliorate it and change really an industry trajectory. And so I want to start with, why do you guys think the industry is changing? Kind of the why now? And jump in there.
Yeah, I mean, I think the issue is, and the panels before us have really laid this out really well, of there is a labor shortage. And what is interesting now in the US is you have 10,000 baby boomers retiring every day, or at least reaching the age of retirement every single day. We are in a very much a shrinking population range right now. We have about 1.6 births per woman when you need 2.1 to actually replace your population. So you have those workforce issues pressing down on it, but also we're starting to see the rise of global manufacturing powers outside of the US. The International Federation for Robotics actually put out their numbers recently that the average robot to 10,000 workers globally is 141. So 141 robots per 10,000 workers on a global scale. Now the good thing is the US is above that average. We're about 244. The problem is there's 6 countries ahead of us. Mm-hmm. And this past year, China actually passed us up, and they actually now are around 350 robots per 10,000 workers. Think of that. We know China is a powerhouse, and now they have more robot density than the United States. So that's pushing the limits even more. And then you look at the #1 country for robotics, and that's Korea, at 1,000 robots per 10,000 workers. That is unreal. But the whole thing is any of us arguing that Korea is not a manufacturing juggernaut right now? And so the whole thing is you got to look at these other countries in this aspect as well of they're investing in robotics because they also have population issues and they're getting ahead of us, plain and simple.
Right.
And I think that's really true. There's the, we always joke that we were talking about labor shortages and then the pandemic hit and now suddenly our friends know what we're talking about. And it just made things worse in manufacturing as well as a lot of other industries. And so I think you have all of those things on the supply side, but there's also on the other side, robotics is really maturing. And when you have a smaller industry, when you just have the very top of the manufacturers who are able to automate, there's just not as much out there for other people to automate. But this trend has been going. I mean, you can look at year over year growth in robotics means that the pie is big enough that people are taking note. They're saying, look, maybe it's not, we're not going to make the huge robot that lifts up the car, but we're going to make one for this segment because they're automating so much and they're underserved by who's out there. And so I think in the last 5 years, you've seen this explosion, both in terms of just the robotic arm capabilities and cost, perception, as well as everything that's happening in AI and machine learning in other areas that can really apply to what's happening here. I mean, it's just driving down the cost and expanding the opportunities for what people are able to automate with.
Awesome. And I'll just add from a venture capital point of view, who's funding a lot of these solutions, we might call it awkward teenage years of these solutions starting to grow up.
Yeah.
But then we're seeing companies like Rapid, Desktop Metal, putting points on the board. And when I say points on the board, here's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about economic gains. I'm talking about a decrease by 15% of total production costs with some of these automation solutions, and a doubling of margins up to 20%. So, in terms of the capital that's available to fund the solutions, it's gaining momentum.
The one thing I did want to say, we definitely in labor issues we're having, but I think some of the other opportunities we miss is a lot of workers now are job hopping, so they get their training, then they go to the next job. So we're losing that value in manufacturing, all the training, and that's months of training we put into this, and then they go on to the next job because it pays a little more or something better about that. So that's another, it's hard to see that cost, but it's there, so.
Right, the tribal knowledge isn't staying. And
Yep.
I think a quote earlier was 30% churn and how hard that is on a company. Great, thanks all. We'll move to the next question here. So each of you brings a really unique point of view on the state of robotics today. And I want to ask, what are you seeing out there in terms of what manufacturers are actually asking for? And also I want to add on, in terms of when they're asking, how are they going to crest that huge hill from 0 to 1, really getting started?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing we're seeing that they're asking is, what can I automate? I mean, our customers even when they have automation teams, they talked about this in a previous panel, they'll focus on those really high value, the high runners or the super intricate or the high tolerances, whatever that piece is. But when we come in, we look at the factory and go, well, that's 3 robots, right? And you have hundreds and hundreds of opportunities here. And so really going and understanding what is the current state of the art and also what is the current affordable state of the art, I think that's a really important piece, is a big question, because kind of the follow on to all this stuff that's changed over the last 5 years is it's changed in the last 5 years. And so if you learned about robotics 5 years ago and said, well, I can't do this thing because the technology's not there or the arm is too expensive, it's really changing now, and it's changing on an annual basis. So we're really, one of the things we really do is we come in as the robotics expert and partner with the customer as the manufacturing expert. And so we talk with them about what are they doing, how are they, going about what their process, what's a hard requirement, and what's just something that this is the way we did it because it worked. And work with them and say, well, okay, what a robot can do, we can get a robot in right there, but you're going to have to change your process a little. And sometimes they go, well, we really, really can't do that. But a lot of times it goes, oh, that's completely fine. We'll just swap out that process.
And just to jump in real quick, I mean, one thing Reddick is saying, that word partnership is critical to what he just said. I mean, this is collaboration and creating that solution.
And you're doing it with the customer too. So we do a lot of feasibility studies. We come into manufacturing plants and we look at opportunities for automation. Sometimes they don't realize that technology can actually do that. So a lot of times we're just like offering them what technology's out there so they understand a little bit. But that's why I always say the art of the possible. That's my saying, because they don't know what can be done using a robotic solution or any of that automation. So, and a lot of them are looking for that ROI, But I had one customer come in and say, I don't even care about an ROI. I want to keep my lines running, and I have labor issues. So they're shutting down their lines because they didn't have the labor force. So it's more than just ROI, keeping my lines running. It is critical.
Yeah, and I would add that I think we heard from like the first panel about going after the low-hanging fruit use cases, and every industry I've visited has low-hanging fruit available to them. Case in point, the restaurant industry is starting to deploy these server robots that are just running back and forth between the kitchen and the dining hall. That doesn't seem like much, but the biggest waste of a waiter or waitress's time is in there walking back and forth just to retrieve food. So the whole thing is that robot now doing that one task for the waiter is keeping that waiter out on the floor to make sure that the customer's happy. They're checking on the customer, they're making sure your water glass is being refilled, and letting the robot do that menial job of bringing the food out or taking dirty dishes back. So every industry has those low-hanging fruits to go after. I've always said that if you're building pallets of the same SKU over and over again and you don't have a robot doing that right now, you are already behind.
Yeah.
And I will also want to add that there's been some studies talking about how robots take jobs, but when you dig deeper into those, it's actually people might be losing jobs to robots because the competitors are automating with robots and getting bigger orders and raising their productivity to actually put the other company in a tighter spot where they're losing orders and all that because that company did automate.
Right.
So the whole thing is you almost need to look at it in a different way of saying robots, if they are going to take someone's job, they might be taking your competitor's job because you're actually increasing your efficiency higher.
Right.
And I think an important piece, I like that example of the waiting robot, because that's not taking the entirety of that task. And often we see people who will come in and our customers will talk to us and they'll say, well, I want this station automated. And that station is a lot of automatable things, and then one thing at the end, putting in a wire harness or whatever it is, that is very difficult, very expensive to automate. And you really need to look at it and say, well, that was built for maybe a time cycle study for the traditional way of doing it. But if we can do 90% of what that task is at 10% of the cost, right, then let's see if we can rearrange things and move it around. And so for people looking to start to automate, it's important to have an open mind for where can you automate pieces. And as long as those pieces make sense, it's a great win.
And I want to elaborate the concept around proof of concept. So sometimes, the art of the possible, but really let's prove it out. There's an opportunity and start small. Don't scale it up yet. Just do a POC, see if it works, see how, you might learn from that, and that way you can scale up. So proof of concepts are a great way.
Oh, absolutely.
Very little investment for the customer, especially when you have the equipment already where you can actually do some of that work up front.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to add one point here, which is every industrial revolution that we've experienced, we're now in 4.0 plus, has created, in fact, more jobs, with that technology. And so there are certainly short-term pains that are happening with certain jobs going away. But that example of, I think it was Mr. Fu, well, now he's managing 3 robots instead of doing the machine tending on any one of them. So, it's important, it feels like, to not lose the big picture.
Yeah. And I think the Mr. Fu example is perfect because that's the new reality. Is if there's simply just no one out there to hire because the person doesn't exist, what you need to do is you need to find automation that actually is going to supercharge your existing workforce and take Mr. Fu from only having maybe a productivity of what he can produce. Now he has 3 friends that can do probably more than what he's doing, and so we've supercharged him.
Right.
And that's the new reality, and that's how a lot of manufacturers should look at this, is how do I supercharge my existing work staff? Right. Because that might be all you have for a while.
So, just to make a comment, my family calls me the job killer because I put in it's the truth. They walk around job killer, but that's not what I'm doing. I'm actually taking and leveraging those repetitive jobs, those heavy lifting, and they want it. The customer wants it, the employees want this, because we're taking away that and putting them in a better role.
Yes.
So, and don't think about we're killing jobs. We're actually expanding and using our employees better.
Right.
So-
And we're allowing time for humans to do higher order things.
100%. Making decisions, doing PMs on the equipment, things like that.
Right.
Are that's what we want them to do.
Right. And our thesis, I mentioned machines will win. It's that humans are ingenuity, purpose, flexibility, and where we want machines is data, precision, complexity, speed. This is a human-machine collaboration.
Right.
And I think a lot of these conversations, rightfully so, we start with there's an existing process, there's an existing thing we're doing. How do we automate that? But the other piece that's really important is how do we grow our business with automation? And that's, we saw with the supply chain snarls having, boats off of Long Beach for miles means that suddenly the value of having something manufactured here went way up for manufacturers, right? Because they said we can't even get it. So yes, it might be more expensive, but having something more expensive versus not being able to get it is really important. But at the back of their mind, I can guarantee all of them still had that thing that said, but it's more expensive.
Right.
And one of the really important things that we want to do is we're aiming to look at, when we look at the blended labor rate of a facility that includes our robots in that labor rate calculation, we want it to be competitive with offshore. So they don't have to make that distinction of saying, well, we'll do it here strategically, but it's more expensive. It's, we'll do it here strategically and we can do it really affordably. And that's going to bring back a lot of the jobs around that automation, because robots are great at some things and they are terrible at other things. And you better have those operators there who are super experienced, who know how to do things that you've been maturing, as we heard in the last panel, in order to do those other pieces.
So I wanted to elaborate. So I have 4 daughters, and they wanted all, when COVID hit and they couldn't get those things from Amazon, and they were upset. We were upset about that because it was overseas. So now we're moving it back to manufacturing. And really the only way to be competitive is get automation in there. Let's be honest with you, that is the only way. So
Yeah. I mean, I think during COVID, the numbers started coming out of how the price point for manufacturing in China and East Asia, the threshold has been crossed of the cost of manufacturing and then shipping that is now equal to manufacturing it here. So all the economic sense is perfect right now that you need to just invest in automation here, reshore those jobs, reshore those product lines back to the United States, because you can actually do it cheaper and faster and get product to market
100%.
fast.
And to jump in on that, because what Reddick mentioned as well was just all of you were saying ROI, economics here. And I remember at the very beginning of Rapid's inception, there was an ROI calculator of how to think and talk to potential customers about automation. And what I thought was so brilliant about it was it helped people see where they are today, output productivity. What would hybrid automation, what's your first step? And then what's your full automation? So, and also too, how you define ROI is mission critical. That's dependent on the use case completely, often related to time savings. But, the ROI piece is so critical. And also too, one other piece I want to add, especially toward Reddick, is, which I think you appreciate, which is we're not always taking the technology to its max potential. We're meeting a customer demand, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Technology, some people think that technology is magic. And I always say, no, technology is a tool, right? It's like this wrench you have, but it's a much more complex wrench, much more sophisticated, and it really can amplify what people can do, but it's still a tool. And so you really need to know how can you deploy it, how can you use it, where can you not, where can you? And I think one of the really critical things we found in our partnerships with our customers is, for customers who have less experience with automation, it's really important to start by getting 1 robot in there, getting 2 robots in there. Because just by having it on the floor, just by the dialogue we have of this is hard, this is not, can you change this? You start to see what is doable, what is not, and it allows you to actually prepare the rest of your facility for automation. So maybe you say, well, over there, could we put automation there? And it turns out one of the processes, often we'll have this where a lot of things are very manual and a little chaotic, right? A cart's being moved around and the things are dumped on top of it. And we say, well, there's definitely automation potential here, but we need to change the process. And you don't want to start with that one. You don't want to start with the one where you're changing how it comes from this part of the factory to that one. You want to start with one that works really well. But while you're doing that, you can start looking at that process and say, well, do we use these buckets? We had one customer where the buckets they used to put parts in were all different sizes, and it happened to just be the surplus for a customer that they had made. And so that was the buckets. And we said, well, can we have a standardized one? They said, sure, that's absolutely possible.
Yeah.
And that's really important.
Yeah, and I would also add that after you get the first one in, you start learning.
Yes.
you're putting yourself on a journey of a roadmap where you might think what your ultimate is, but as you're learning, you're actually discovering new pathways and all that. But so it is so critical to get that first one in, because, I mean, we all know the proverb of first step of a million-mile journey steps with that first step. I butchered it, but the whole thing is unless you get started, you're not getting anywhere. So start with at least one robot. Find that low-hanging fruit.
And it's another reason, find the right partner. Just
Yes.
from a venture perspective, the 0 to 1, we believe, is the hardest stage. It's not the 1 to 100. So since we've talked a lot about what it means to maybe dip your toe and really get started, for other manufacturers that maybe have hopped on the automation train in the past few years, maybe they're not lights out, they're probably not, but they're, they've got a lot of robots in their facilities and they're thinking, what's next? What new should I be considering?
Yeah, so I mean, I think what we found that's very interesting is there's customers in general where very sophisticated in automation all the way to not as sophisticated in automation. But when you go to a specific factory that has that automation, where they have a great deployment team and an automation team, there's still that distribution. And it goes back to what we were talking about before of that long list of projects that you could automate. And guess what? There's a labor shortage in automation engineers also, so you can't do all of them. You're only going to tackle those top ones. And there's a lot left over that you can go after, especially if you're doing it with the traditional capital model of buying all of your equipment, paying a systems integrator a really high upfront cost. And that makes sense, right? Because it's not like there might be a budget for automation, but that money is money, and that can be spent on anything. You could buy a new injection molding machine to expand your business. You could reduce costs by automating, and it's going to all be competing for one thing. And what we really like to do is come in and basically say, great, you should focus on those top pieces. And we'll really come in right here in the middle of the things that on the traditional model do not make sense. But with an ongoing payment, with a RAS model, you get benefit right from day one. And so we can fill in those gaps, and you probably heard this already today, fill in those cracks of, yeah, we're not going to have one of our very valuable in-house engineers sitting figuring out how to automate this pad printer because they're figuring out how to make sure that this big deployment is really running smoothly. But guess what? If you automate that pad printer, you freed up that operator to now oversee 5 automated pad printers.
Yep.
And so we go into these manufacturing plants, and I see packing lines. They're pretty automated. They got palletizing robots, they got picking, but then they still have this operator that has to load materials onto a conveyor every 15 minutes, or doing a quality inspection. Freeing up that robot, or freeing up that person, and putting a robotic solution gives them the ability to maybe manage 3 or 4 lines. So it's taken another step further and making that very automated. So that's where we look at some of those, and a lot of them the customer didn't think it's possible.
Right.
So vision systems and those kinds of things have just come a long way. So they've really.
I think of a lot of it too as a spectrum of where the human should be in the loop.
Right. Yep.
And one other thing to the manufacturers who already do have robots deployed, I wanted to add, I believe it's very important to evaluate, did you achieve, and this is VC speak, but product market fit with your first deploys? And so what I'm talking about is validation of your unit economics, at least across 5 to 10. I'm talking about, do you have the operations, teams, supply chain? I guess the cautionary piece I'm trying to share here is avoid blitz scaling, growth at all costs, until you've done this internal audit and you've been intellectually honest with yourself. For our next question, a common narrative is that manufacturing production is actually on a downward trend. And for those manufacturers that have seen this production slowdown, what can they start doing today to recapture that work?
It's such a loaded question because with every industry, you go through your business cycles. And you're going to have good years and bad years. But this is where I think also the whole robot as a service comes into play, because when you have that uptick in orders, you can ramp up and get more robots on the line. And then when the downturn happens, if allowed, you can exit that robots as a service contract for that time period or redeploy. And so the whole thing is when we look at the current economic conditions, and then look at the solutions that are out there as robots as a service, you actually are starting to see a good match that matches those economic cycles, because the robot as a service model allows you to flex up and flex down as you need.
Right.
And I think that's something that's going to be very magical going forward. It's interesting, we can actually see the Salesforce Tower, the king of software as a service, and here we are talking robots as a service right here in the shadow of that. So what software as a service has accomplished is going to happen within robots as a service. It's just going to take a little bit longer because of some hardware component, but the whole thing is that model is going to be so perfect going forward.
Yep.
And I think, yeah, robot as a service, but you got to expand even equipment as a service. It's starting to come that way. I mean, we call it Gray Solutions GRAS as our Gray as a service, because there's a lot more opportunities, just that, because for those special events going up and down. Did mention some of the industries during COVID didn't meet that downturn. I think during COVID, everyone got a pet and they might have drank a little more. So that industry actually beefed up quite a bit. So we were pretty busy with some of those opportunities. But I think, yeah, it's starting to slow down and people are starting to look at their budgets a little closer. But the way to get by as a robot as a service, you still want to continue that path. Don't slow down, don't stop, and look at other opportunities for saving. I think robot as a service is a great opportunity.
And it's interesting in these cycles, especially if business is falling off a little, costs become much more important, and a really great way to control costs is to help automate, because you can continue doing what you're doing at a lower cost. But that also gets captured in how to capture new business in a very competitive type market, which is your costs are already embedded in your competitiveness in your bid, right? And you can't bid on something you're going to lose money on. And if you can drive down what that cost is, because you say, actually, we've looked at this, and this can be automated, kind of from out the gate, because we know we're not going to do a lights out line, which would be very expensive, but we can put a robot, or a rapid robot preferably, right there at that task. We can bid much more competitively on this, and we've seen a lot of success from our customers in winning new business because they know what their cost is going to be, and it's predictable. It's not operators coming in and out and needing to retrain new ones. It's once the thing is trained, it knows what it's doing.
And I'll add a final point on that of manufacturers, if you're giving tours to your customers to sell them on your product, I can tell you as a former customer of those things, if I saw robots in there, that told me that this company's a little bit further ahead. They're thinking, and it brings up, well, that means their cost is going to be a little bit more in check. But the whole thing is would you rather work with a manufacturer that is showing that they're automating and they're doing all these cool things, or one that's not? And the whole thing is if your customers are coming onto your factory floor, just like if you're using that to recruit workers, those robots can help you recruit customers as well, because it just shows that you are at another level as a manufacturer.
And I think that there's a psychological component as well of you see a robot working on something, you go, well, whatever they're going to tell me is going to be one of the best quotes I'm going to get, even if you look at someone else and go, well, that's all manual. I'm sure the robotic one will be much better.
We do a lot of greenfields manufacturing facilities, and the last thing someone wants, and we had a few customers do that. Well, let's not automate it quite yet. I mean, it's a greenfield. You want as much automation. You try to do that later, it's more of a struggle. You do it up front, and this is the technology we're going to use, and go with that. And you might be a little more cost up front, but it's going to be more cost if you wait and do it. So I think that's important.
And I would add that we're talking also a lot about the brownfield and existing legacy infrastructure, and how do we automate pieces of that? I think it's both.
Yeah.
So a fun question is to ask y'all about some surprising solutions that are available today that manufacturers might not yet know about. So maybe Reddick, you can get us started.
Yeah, I think that just, again, talking about what the development that's happened in the last 5 years, there's been just a huge amount on both how quickly and how flexibly you can set up a system to work. So, the traditional way of automating is everything is completely rigidly attached. If you want a conveyor, it's got to be a very expensive conveyor that indexes to exactly the right spot and holds the part. And that's just not as true anymore at prices that are really accessible for much lower runners, right? So I think one of the interesting things about automation is too expensive might as well be not possible, right? That there's no difference. Yes, almost everything in the world is automatable with an unlimited budget. But if it's too expensive, then you really can't do that. And we're seeing a lot of really interesting advances on some of the vision systems, right? What we can do looking at it both with reasonable hardware or even commodity hardware. It all depends on what the requirements are. But being able to understand how that plays in with your process and your system is really, really critical, because if you have something that's set up that you can use a almost consumer grade camera and a really smart machine learning algorithm on, then that's going to be just a super flexible work cell that'll pay off dividends going forward.
And I want to elaborate. The vision systems and some of those things, a vision system, look at your camera now, what it can do now. The vision systems now are amazing. We're dealing with some high spectrum cameras that can do the wavelength and pick out products. So and robots actually taking off the rejects off from that. So I really say quality is a big area of growth, and the use of robotics and visions and automation. And really, it's one area when we talk about AI, it's one of the areas where AI is actually being used. So vision systems are learning as they get more pictures. So I think that's a growth that is coming. So, and I come back to that line that needs to be totally automated. Having machine tending is another area that's going to be focusing. Let's do it all. So instead of doing just a partial of it.
Yeah, I mean, I would highly recommend every manufacturer on here look up Manufacturing USA. It's a group of actually research institutions that are public-private between the federal government and numerous companies, and they're definitely trying to bring a lot of new stuff from research into play. Institutes like the ARM Institute in Pittsburgh, America Makes in Youngstown, Ohio, are all doing some really interesting things that are going to bring more things to market. And one of the things they have been working on is inspection robots.
Oh, yeah.
And it's really interesting there's actually 2 studies going on right now of when you inspect a part, should the camera be on the end of the robot and it goes around the part, or should the robot pick up the part and bring it to the camera and move the part around the camera? I mean, that sounds a little mundane, but the whole thing is if one is better than the other, and we learn that now, that's going to get deployed faster.
And gripping or sucking,
Yeah.
like for example.
Yes, I mean,
sucking is usually easier. So
yeah, I mean, so the whole thing is, I mean, we're working on trying to do standards around grasping strength for end effectors, so we can provide that to manufacturers of here's how you can test your end effector to make sure it's going to work properly for your application. So there's a lot of interesting data out there as manufacturers, and I know you're trying to run your business, but it really tap into some of these other institutions, and especially Manufacturing USA is a great one. They work with large to small manufacturers, and it really becomes a networking opportunity also for manufacturers just to tap into a larger ecosystem.
Yeah, and one other comment about partnership and ecosystem, some of these early players like Rapid, some of the tools they have to accelerate go-to-market are things like synthetic data for some of that machine vision, or 3D printing grippers and 10x decreasing the cost of those. I mean, these are why you want to pick the right partners.
Yeah, absolutely. 3D printing I love, because when I started out on NPI doing manufacturing, we would 3D print the first prototype out of SLS, and anybody who's dealt with SLS knows if it's in the sun for too long or in the lights for too long, it gets brittle and cracks. Yep. And there was a mandate that that's your prototype was great, and then go get that thing machined, Delrin metal, whatever it ended up being. And today, with the advances of carbon infill and just these super sophisticated 3D printers, we can 3D print most of our production grippers directly from our library of parts, and it goes into production.
And that takes us back to the theme I would use to name this is mutable software wrapped around off-the-shelf or low-cost hardware. And another theme that I want to put on the table here is human augmentation to give humans machine strength. Think about exoskeletons. Verve Motion is a good example of that. Another one is software-powered retrofits of existing very expensive equipment like built robotics and hydraulics retrofit to make heavy earth-moving equipment affordable and accessible. So many fun themes that we should be talking about more.
Yeah, absolutely.
This next question is related to our last in terms of solutions, but it's oriented a little farther out in the future. So what do y'all see 5 to 10 years out?
Yeah, I get asked this a lot, and I think the really critical thing is that robotics is a pretty big and growing industry, but it's not that big compared to cell phones or other industries. And honestly, e-commerce is also really coming to be a very big player in robotics. And so I usually say, let's look at what is happening in those other industries, and will it have applications here? And what we're seeing there, I mean, the first thing is just around a lot of the vision solutions getting more commoditized and getting brought down in price, right? Where, right today there might be one solution that does really great of this type of inspection. I can guarantee you in 2 years there's going to be 3 or 4 or 5 of them as everybody realizes those techniques are very viable and they can go work on that. As we look also more in, it's a slightly different in logistics and warehousing. There's a slightly different difficulty in that things are usually very different, right? In manufacturing, we do the luxury of you're going to be running 1 to 10 SKUs on that line, and you can kind of plan around that. But what's really exciting is some of those advances means that we can bring over the ability to deal with the uncertainty into what robotics can do, and that's a lot of what we're working on here. Because then you can have a much lower setup effort, right? It's not going and picking up that part over there. It's whatever happens to be here, figure out how to pick it up and put it into the nest in exactly the right orientation. And so seeing all of those things, I think it's going to just continue to really increase the flexibility of robotics, and which will in turn make it so that you can use it for more and more things.
Yeah, I elaborate a little bit on that. So the one thing, we see a lot of solutions, manufacturing equipment providers will provide solutions that will meet some need. But what happens if we change the products? Do we have to get another machine, or maybe we want to do something different? I think the robotics area is so flexible that you can make changes pretty rapidly and get that out of that. So that piece of it. So I think we're competing a lot with equipment providers because robots have that flexibility to do more. And I also think that, the warehouses are where we use AGVs and AMRs. We're doing a lot with that in robotics as well, and palletizing. But I think it's in the process area is where it's going to actually blow up, because those are the areas where you have a lot of workers. If you go into a packing, you don't see that many people out in the packing, but in the processing area, and just automating that with more robots doing heavy lifting and things like that, that's where it's going to be going. And that's where people are going to focus on, because this worker picking up this 60-pound bag is not the future, and we got to change that. So.
Yeah, and I'd just say we're going to see more robots across every industry. There's no going back. We're going to see robots in every industry, and even industries we're not even thinking of right now in 5 to 10 years. And my hope is that we also start breaking down some of these silos between manufacturing, logistics, semiconductor. I mean, the list just goes on and on. Because the whole thing is you might have a counterpart in another industry that is having the same problem you are.
100%.
Exactly the same problem. And maybe they come up with a solution that fixes their problem, and it could fix yours, but because we're all so siloed, it's gonna, you're not gonna learn about that.
Right.
So the whole thing is I know I've thrown the challenge down to my team at ASTM that we need to be more open of communicating what we're seeing across all the industries. I know Alex at A3, they're doing that too. And it's just gonna take, I think, all of us share these successes, and as Nikki even said in the first panel, share your failures as well. It upsets me so much of when I talk to academics of, hey, I thought you were working on this project. Yeah, it didn't work out, we killed it. Okay, where's the published results? Oh, we don't publish our failures. And it's like, well then, so you're setting somebody else up to do the same thing and fail again, and we don't learn.
How do we build off each other?
Yes.
Versus starting at zero each time.
So embrace your failures and show them off as much as you show off your successes.
Yep, I love that. My perspective here is we're at the stage of a lot of analog siloed machines, or we were. Now there's more digital siloed machines, and I think it's going to become digital interconnected dynamic machines. And that speaks to a lot more of that collaboration, learning from one another and machines. Without repeating earlier panels, we've talked a lot about urgency and why it's so important to get started with automation immediately. What would you guys like to share?
if we don't do it, we're not going to be competitive. That's where it all comes down to. And I think that's the word you have to say. If you want to be competitive, if labor's going to continue on being an issue, it's not going to change in the next couple of years. So if you don't start now, you're going to find yourself in the dust, and your competitors are going to beat you, and you're going to close your doors. So
Yeah, I mean, that's what it really is going to come down to is if you don't automate, your competition is,
Yep.
and that could be here in the US or it could be somewhere overseas. The whole thing is you have to keep raising your own bar because, trust me, everyone else is. And if you let them get ahead, yes, you will lose your job and your company to robots because the robots at the other company are making them more profitable and more productive.
And it's so important to be on that journey as soon as possible because you'll open your eyes to completely new areas that will give you an advantage over your competitors. That it might not be just at the base level, and everybody doesn't have to follow everyone else. Your business might have some advantages, but if you're not starting now, then in 5 years when you want to start, you'll miss out on that next level of what you really could be doing.
Yeah.
And I think we can't be scared of the technology. That's what it's new. I don't have the support staff to support these robotic solutions. Well, that's where RAS comes in and things like that. There's programs out there that are changing that perspective. So don't be scared because we're going to support you. We're going to make it happen, and that's the key.
And to me, the bigger picture there is what does it mean to build trust with machines?
Yeah.
To echo what Reddick just said there, it takes a generation, right, to make your first deploys and then mature and scale these technologies. So if we don't start now, we're behind. And I think we all share the goal of having Made in America be financially viable. Yeah. And also, in comparison, thinking of the Made in China initiative, where they're putting $350 billion into robotics by 2025. And so to the point you've been making, the competition is certainly real.
Yeah, I mean, Korea has a national plan. Germany has a national plan. We're starting to see some of that form here in the US, and it can be done. It's just, we all have to work together on this.
Awesome. I'm going to thank you so much to my wonderful panelists and also to the audience for listening in. This has been a really fun conversation. If Jordan, you'll allow me, I want to share a short quote and then we'll jump into questions. So this is one that inspires me in terms of encouraging AI and robotics adoption. This is what AI always does. Excel didn't give us artificial accountants. Photoshop didn't give us artificial graphic designers. Steam engines didn't give us artificial horses. Rather, we automated one discrete task at massive scale. And Reed Wilson said that. So with that, thank you guys so much.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you all. And so I'm actually, I switched my first question just based on that last topic. This is a clean and simple one. Reshoring, period. Nearshoring, period. Is it real? And what do we have to do to get there, to make that a reality?
No? What are you saying?
So say that again,
Reshoring, period. Nearshoring, period. Is it real? And basically, I'm summarizing what do we have to do to make it a reality. And I do want to start with you because, Greg, in your capacity of bringing together multiple different technologies in order to solve new problems in modern, modular, flexible ways, I think you might have a unique perspective on what's the timeline for that. That's my addition to that question. Like, what's the timeline for that, and what do we need to be doing now to facilitate it?
I mean, so we do an array of automation and really looking at these manufacturing as a whole and looking at those opportunities. But I still say start small a little bit and do those POC type things. Challenge that. You got to do it now, and it'll make that plan for the future where you can go stronger. But you got to take the step. So that I guess if that's answered their question, I think I'm answering the question.
Yeah.
Okay.
It kind of is, right? It's basically, we hear about it all the time, right? And the administration is doing a lot of things, like you mentioned, that are starting to look more like the national plans that other countries and regions have in place that are so productive.
Yeah.
But it's kind of hard to look and say, hey, there's a giant company that works with an absolutely enormous city's worth of contract manufacturing, in China. What's the process? What's the length of time? What are we talking about to start seeing some of that sort of, filter back into more regional, localized production.
And I think one of the big things is, once there's something very established, it is costly to change it. And so that's going to be a little bit of a drag on that. But you better believe that that design engineer who's designing that next part has a very different calculus when they're deciding where is that going to be manufactured today than they did 4 years ago, right? And US is going to absolutely be in that calculus. And then the key is, again, all the things we've discussed to make sure that, if there's might not be as many factories here making screws because that a lot of those have been outshored, but if you can be that factory making screws so that the next factory down the road can take it from you in a very just-in-time way, automate that, make it affordable so that we can bring back the entire ecosystem. Because manufacturing, it is an ecosystem, right? It's not just one factory.
It needs to come back to the US, and we're establishing, I'm more in the food industry. You go to look at some, and I do a lot of tours of manufacturing plants, they're very unautomated, and we have to change that. And they're asking for it, they just don't know how to do it. So, and that's where we need to educate them. We need to make sure they understand the technology's out there to do what they want. So I think that's an important thing, is getting out there and getting to these manufacturers, showing them showcases, showing them robot as a service. We've got to get that out there so they understand what's out there. So, and then they can actually take that plunge to that.
Awesome.
Yeah, and going back to the question of, is it really happening? Is reshoring happening? Is nearshoring happening? We definitely are starting to see data that nearshoring is definitely happening at the Mexico border, where you're having goods assembled on the Mexico side and then brought over to the U.S. or even finished on the U.S. side. So the whole thing is we are definitely starting to see data supporting that. I think for actual reshoring, we have all these great announcements from Intel, GM, Ford, that they're putting factories here. And I think it's just going to take a little bit more time for those numbers to start producing. But the whole thing is the money is coming in. The money is getting invested into these.
I want to go back. My daughter's not getting their iPhones anymore because they were, being shipped over. They got upset. So, and Americans got upset when they couldn't have their stuff. So it's coming back because of that. I mean, demand is, we have it here so we can, logistically get it to the consumer quicker.
Yeah, but it sounds to me it's kind of the same process to get it back here as it is to get that first level of automation in your facility, right?
100%.
Which is you have to start, what's the new program that's being created, or, you're a contract manufacturer and you win your first contract back from overseas, right? And you start kind of like, it's going to be this slow roll is kind of my take, right? It's not like Foxconn's going to pick up and move to America tomorrow, right? Yeah. It's not going to happen. And so it is, really interesting to me to see. We're starting to see some of that as well. Yeah. That realization that happened, during COVID and with the Suez Canal backup, where that one little part got stuck, and all of a sudden we can't make the whole thing. And it's like, well, if I had a robot here making that one little part, then that one little part is no longer a risk in my supply chain.
Yes.
Right? And it's sort of like piece by piece by piece is kind of how it looks like it's coming together, which is fascinating. So there's been some talk around ecosystem. And I actually, when I made my introduction last night to the smaller group, I talked about how vital the ecosystem is, and that when we started Rapid, it wasn't like Rapid is going to solve all the problems, right? It takes a village, truly, and in this case, the village is an ecosystem of technology partners, of great integrators, of great, forward-leaning manufacturers who are looking to the future and trying to, de-risk the future of their business away from some of these global events. And so with all of that being said, and it's one of the things that we're very excited about, and I'll mention now. We just struck a partnership, fully integrated partnership with both Universal Robots as well as Yaskawa. And 10 years ago, that kind of a relationship was not possible, right? Because the level of access that we have to the robots to make them do what we need to do, the level of access we have to other, of our partners on the computer vision side and cameras and sensors. How important is it that we and manufacturers start looking at this ecosystem? And the question especially is, in the light of the siloed industry that has, you mentioned the silos of the industries, between like logistics and manufacturing or whatever, but there's also these big silos up between all the components needed to make a robot run, right? And really traditionally, the only ones that can bring that all together are systems integrators. What should we be thinking about doing? What should manufacturers be thinking about doing in order to break down those silos?
I think we mentioned a little bit, share the ideas of the successes that we have. I mean, if we have a solution that's a quality inspection or something, we got to share that and have it a common, make it as a service, because that's the best way to, but get those out there, those ideas, and get everyone, let's share it, you know, we're all here together, we can, and get with our system integrators or whoever we need to and kind of collaborate on some of these things, because we know a lot of opportunities. The technology we don't always know, so bringing that all together, we can build a lot.
Yeah, and it doesn't, you know, the technology and what something can do doesn't break down nicely on vertical lines. So just because this thing is really good in, you know, this other industry, the alcohol industry or something like that, that doesn't mean it's not good for certain applications in other areas.
100%.
And so, you know, it just happens that their go-to-market was there and they found a nice toehold and that's where they're focusing. And I think what's so important also is in terms of this sharing is getting some of that, you know, customer pull, we call it, right? Where someone takes this sensor that was not at all meant to be used for them and they rig it up to their robot and they go, look, now I'm doing this inspection. And all of a sudden, not only do other people know that's possible, but the company knows. The company can start targeting that and opening up more doors there. And I think that's really important in that cross collaboration.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many opportunities out there to connect with the ecosystem. Every state has a manufacturing extension program assigned to it from the federal government. So each state, you can tap into those resources and network with those folks and learn all those. All the trade shows that are coming down the pipe, like Automate and ProMat and all that, those are great places to network. But it is going to come down to more collaborations, more interoperability work amongst all these players so we can deploy faster. Because the whole thing is the moment those barriers started coming down and more like ROS open source coding was made available, and you could actually start connecting all these diverse robots and sensors together, that's when it started really starting to take off. So the whole thing is we just need to do more of that. The more we do of that and the more people share their thoughts, they bring their voices to the table, the sky's the limit. I mean, I have never seen anyone that says, oh, this is mine, I'm going to hold on to it, I'm not going to share it with anyone, fully succeed. Yeah. Those that actually open up their systems and work with others, those are the ones who succeed.
Awesome. All right, everybody, thank you so much. What an amazing, really fun day. So thank you all. So that is it. That is all we have for today. I hope everybody really enjoyed it, whether you're in Detroit, whether you're online, whether you're here. Thank you so much for the participation from all our panelists. I think the dialogue and conversation was really inspiring and super helpful. I think also a lot of really good takeaways from this. Any questions that we did not get to answer in the Q&As, we will be answering. And then feel free also, if you want to learn more about Rapid Robotics, if you want to learn more about any of the folks who are up here today on the panels or their companies, email events@rapidrobotics.com. And we will get back to you. And I think that is all. Did I miss anything? Anything else I need to say? We're all good? All right. Everybody have a wonderful rest of your week. Thank you so much. See you next time.
Walking up to me, expecting words. Happens all the time. Present company, accept the worst. It happens every